Is there any other way that you can instill, kind of morality, ethics, or whatever within a corporate culture?
Yes. So I don't bring this up in the book, but thank you for asking. I'm going to write a book about an idea that I call leading for virtue. And the virtue is a very old idea. Values are very new. We've really only talked about values as a sort of ethical tool in the U.S. for about 40 or 50 years. It comes out of the Vietnam War. There's not time here to go into it, but it's relatively new and relatively shallow. The idea, you just, well, these are my values. I mean, it assumes all kinds of things. It assumes you know yourself. The great ethicists and moralists emphasize that you learn who you are by looking at your behavior, not by announcing your values. And so Aristotle, among many, Confucius would be another, an Indian thinker named Kautilya, you can go on in the ancient world, emphasized that virtue is a habit, it's a practice, and you get to be the kind of person you want to be by trying to act that way, by focusing really on behavior. So my notion would be that instead of corporations announcing values, they should put virtues out there as a goal, the same way they do as profits. And so we want to be an honest company, we want to do this, we want to do that. And if you put those out there as goals, you kind of arm employees a little more strongly, at least, to say, whoa, this isn't going to get us where we want to be in terms of our virtues goals.
Related to that is corporate social responsibility, which there's a lot of talk about. Do you think that can have an impact?
I think there's no question it can have an impact. There are many companies around the world these days, not just in the U.S., but companies overseas that we can learn a huge amount from in terms of their corporate social responsibility programs. It's gone from a point where 20 years ago, if a corporate social responsibility program was related to the company's profitability and strategy, that was considered sort of shameful because these were supposed to be efforts that were noble, had nothing to do with making money. The conventional wisdom these days is that strategy and social responsibility should be interlinked, trying to create shared value for society and the corporation. I think we need to go one step further and recognize that sometimes sometimes you have to have that moral energy separate from strategy in order to have the workforce really believe that, and for people to be believing that this isn't just business as usual. It's not just public relations. So we need both. We need the CSR effort connected to strategy, but we also need CSR that's not connected to strategy and driven simply by a moral imperative, because that's what really gives the energy and brings people along, gives them confidence that this thing is real.
Which also gets back to your thoughts on shareholder value and the goals of management. Reengineering the Corporation, which you talk about as extremely influential book. Can you kind of give the main thesis of that and what kind of things have transpired as a result of it?
The basic idea of reengineering the corporation, which was a big 1990s movement, and I think the idea is pretty solid, was that information technology had made it possible to break down the traditional business functions so that you no longer had to have walls between the marketing department and the shipping department and so forth. And you could have one person at a computer take care of receiving the order and pushing a button, and the automatic machinery pulls the item off the shelf and sends it off to the shipper. And so you could create tremendous efficiencies. You could get rid of a lot of layers of management, make the corporation much more efficient, make it leaner, and those things all worked very well. And so I think reengineering has undoubtedly done a lot of good in terms of making us a more productive economy. The downside, of course, is that the corporation really became a place where that was much more friendly to very highly skilled, very well-educated people, and the sort of 1950s notion of the American dream, in which people with high school educations could earn those middle-class salaries, began to disappear pretty quickly.
There's a lot of talk about finger pointing on the Great Recession.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give your view in the context of the things you talk about in the book as to what caused the Great Recession?
Sure. So one of the industries that profited from reengineering and high technology more than most was the finance industry and the ability to process enormous amounts of information. And so there were great efficiencies in finance that were achieved, but also a certain kind of hubris that you could engage in analysis and putting together financial instruments that would really take the risk out of very highly leveraged products. And so that of course was one problem. The second was a very well-meaning effort by the Bush administration. It didn't get a lot of play, but George Bush was a big believer in an idea that he called the ownership society. And he pushed the banks very hard to make it possible for everyone to have an ownership stake in American society. He thought that would create all kinds of invested effort and so forth. And so the administration helped make it possible for banks to issue loans, real estate loans to buy houses to people who really shouldn't have been in the market for a house. And when push came to shove, when the market finally started down, they very quickly lost what tiny amounts of equity they had. If you were a homeowner under those circumstances, it didn't really make much sense for you to go on with your mortgage payment. If the house was underwater, it was called jingle mail, as I'm sure you know, they mailed in the keys, and the banks were stuck with an awful lot of bad loans. All of those financial instruments that had been based on the idea that we could make calculations that would spread the risks across a range of institutions and nothing could possibly go wrong, those plans were proven to be all wrong. And so we had the financial crisis of 07, 08, and the recession was on.
And of course, we're still struggling with it. And you mentioned entrepreneurship.
Yes.
As one of the ways that will get us out of this. Can you talk a little about the different ways that entrepreneurship might be helpful?
Well, it seems very clear because of the technological changes that we've just been discussing and the way in which organizations have become more efficient, that the old, heavily bureaucratic, multi-layered structure of the 1950s that was such a successful employer for Americans isn't really going to be there in that form anymore. Even the really successful corporations, the IBMs and so forth, have gotten much leaner and much more skilled in using technology. So it seems likely that the American people are going to have, the ones who get ahead, are going to have to, more and more of us are going to have to be self-employed. Fortunately, that's more and more possible, thanks again partly to information technology. So there are all sorts of possibilities out there for people to own their own businesses and to especially in the service industries, and to support their families in useful ways. And so I think that can happen, but it takes more than Babson College and its entrepreneurship program. I think we have to make teaching entrepreneurship a national effort, and that can be done in community colleges, in high schools, in non-traditional locations, in adult education programs. That has to come. At the same time, I think we shouldn't fool ourselves into believing that the big corporation is going to go away. It's going to continue to be there in many industries, and many, many Americans will continue to work for large corporations. And so corporate power and its undemocratic nature and its undemocratic culture and the dangers in that will continue to be there, and it's something for us to guard against.
Kind of final question, how do you think that'll play out? The future of the corporation, which goes back to the beginning and all these things talked about. Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I'm a little bit of both. I guess on balance, I think it's a risky game. And what will reduce the risk, because I do believe that the corporation poses a risk to democracy. It's really not so much the financial power of the corporation as it is the cultural power and these dangerous ideas like values-based leadership that spill into the political arena and start to change the democratic nature of our people. That I think is the key problem. And what will reduce that risk is if more people become knowledgeable about corporate life and the way it works. I thought the Occupy Wall Street movement was on the whole a good thing in the calling attention to corporate power. I think that's fine. But what we need is not just people to protest corporate power, but we need the public to understand and follow the corporate economy at the same level of detail that it follows the election of 2012. In other words, we need an informed citizenry that understands the importance of these institutions. We live in a country in which we have not just powerful government, but we have powerful corporations, and we should follow that fact, follow those events, follow the ideas that are being developed there, and pass judgment on them and be part of that discussion in the same way that we are in the political arena.
Well, I think that's a good place to close. It's a fascinating collection of ideas that you've got in this book, Corporate Dreams. We've been talking to James Hoops. He is a distinguished professor at Babson College for Business Insight. I'm Peter Marks. Thanks for joining us.